So this week I've been covering the lore for the map Bartlett University on Rainbow Six Siege. And I have to admit, it's been a lot of fun as this map kind of holds a little place in my heart. And that aside, when it comes to its actual lore, it's really no secret that it's basically Harvard University. But in going through the map and looking at everything that's in it and looking for Easter eggs and what connects, I don't believe there's actually an event attached to this map. It almost feels like a time capsule, if I'm being completely honest, showcasing different pictures with existing maps on R6 and what seemed to be like old high school photos of what I can only assume are people actually connected to Ubisoft. But if I ever get to talk to somebody at Ubisoft, I want to know who this woman is. I have spent way too many hours this week researching her, and I was just like, oh. But all that aside, I do enjoy being able to actually make a video and tell something historically factual that has happened and interconnected somehow. So in saying that, I'm going to actually tell the story of the Unabomber. But I do want to state, I don't think that this map is based off the Unabomber. I just thought it was really interesting with my research that there were similarities. It's just that Ubisoft portrays this map, you know, with Bartlett University in the trailer, with the bombers and terrorists, combined with the fact that the Unabomber actually went to Harvard and he was a genius. Sadly, very twisted genius, but genius nonetheless. And on that note, I'm going to be telling his story. So let's get into it. Fensadisky was born May 22nd, 1942. At 9 months old, he contracted a serious case of hives and had to be quarantined for 10 days. Now, when he came back, his mother stated that he was the same after that. He never laughed, smiled, he wouldn't keep eye contact. Most of the time, you know, there's some horrific story from your childhood, and in Ted's case, it's documented that he had a good childhood, that his parents were loving, he had a younger brother that just admired him. So when looking through psychology of Ted, this came up as a point of maybe something that could have altered him. Now, growing up, Ted was known as a very shy, quiet child. He was incredibly intelligent, for the most part documented as a genius, a prodigy. He skipped a grade in elementary school and graduated high school early, and then got into Harvard at 16 years old. It's very much noted as well, he had a passion for chemistry, which unfortunately we can put two and two together, causes a lot of boom booms in the future. Now, Ted actually received his Bachelor of Arts in 3 years at Harvard. But another key point in his upbringing is Harvard itself. He wasn't prepared to go to Harvard. This was a school for the elite. So Ted showed up with literally 2 shirts and 2 trousers to his name, very young, and unfortunately was put into a house that was considered at the time the most snobbish. But what is noted to be the most stressful thing for him is in his senior year at 17 years old, he entered a behavior research program led by a professor known as Henry Murray. Now, in this program, they asked Ted to write an essay on his philosophy of life and told him that he would be debating this with his fellow students. But what Ted didn't know is these essays were actually brought over to a groomed law student who was coached to humiliate them, to bring them down. So when they went to go debate, they were actually hooked up so they could watch their stress levels. And these students were specifically picked because they were already emotionally unstable. And it's documented that Ted went through 200 hours in this program, and is later believed that was the seed to one of his bombings, as he chose to send it to a psychologist's home and has never made a secret about his disdain for psychology. Now, after Harvard, Ted actually moved on to still continue his education, and he ended up getting his doctorate. Like, he's seriously a very, very smart dude. And after getting his doctorate, he actually went on to get a job as an assistant professor at the University of California in Berkeley. However, he found the social aspect of the job and being around people overwhelming and abruptly resigned in 1969. And by 1971, had decided to be rid of society in general, choosing to buy over an acre of land in Montana, where he built a small cabin and retreated from the world. Some say this was the shift that allowed him to obsess in solitude, where he constantly wrote of his disdain for society and technology, and eventually wrote the very famous manifesto. And after completing it, he actually sent it off to his brother, which at this point seemed to be the only person he cared to even keep in contact with anymore. Now, over the next 7 years, Ted ended up actually taking action in his obsession, to where he went from writings and solitude to putting that brilliant mind to work, but in the worst ways. His first 2 bombs were actually not overly noticed. I mean, they went off, but they were a year apart and nobody was seriously hurt, so they never made the connection for the 2. His 3rd bomb, however, got the attention of the FBI. On November 15, 1979, he put a bomb on American Air Flight 444. Now, the bomb failed to go off due to a faulty seal, but had it gone off properly, as noted by the FBI, they assumed that it actually would have just killed everybody on the plane. And so the cat and mouse game began, as this is actually noted as one of the biggest manhunts involving the FBI. As Ted, for lack of better words, he was brilliant, so he made sure that he used everyday items when it came to his bombs, stuff that you could buy anywhere. And if anything had serial numbers, he would file them off. He was very careful and very meticulous. And between the span of 1978 till 1995, he ended up killing 3 people and injuring 23 others with his bombs. And he actually got his name Unabomber because when the FBI created a file on him, the file name was Unabomb, and it stood for University and Airline. So when the media got a hold of that, they just dubbed him the Unabomber. And the craziest thing for me learning about this story was the fact that Ted was never even on the FBI's radar. At all. I try to wrap my head around it because he could have killed so many more people. And the only thing that got him caught turned out to be his brother. You see, he sent that manifesto to his brother in the early 70s when he had completed it. His brother had just put it away, never thought too much of it. But his brother's wife, when, the whole world is fixated on this Unabomber and you're reading the news articles and watching the news, and finally, his wife was thinking about the manifesto and how much was in common with her brother-in-law. So she had mentioned it to her husband, and at first he was like, no. But then the more he thought about it, the more he actually compared the Unabomber to the way even his brother speaks. He got this sinking feeling, and they ended up hiring a private investigator to try to figure it out and to compare everything that was on the news. And at the end of the investigation, he finally decided to turn it over to the FBI. And the crazy part is, so the FBI gets this information and they still don't believe it's Ted, because you have to remember at this point, Ted is living in the middle of nowhere with no transportation, and he lives in a cabin he built himself with no electricity or running water. So the FBI in their heads is how can he even make these bombs without having these certain things? But eventually the FBI did think there was enough in that manifesto and had actually it compared with psychologists. His mindset is the right mindset for somebody who could be the Unabombers. So they went out to that little cabin to check it out. And when they went there was more than enough evidence, as it was just cracked wide open. And they officially caught the Unabomber. Now, after Ted's arrest, his lawyers realized that there was no way. They had a mountain of evidence. There was no way of getting out of it. So they decided that they were going to go for the insanity plea, which Ted was not happy with. He was furious about this. He was willing to die for his cause, go for the death penalty. He was not crazy. So Ted ended up going through a slew of tests and being diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. And in the end, Ted ended up taking a plea for life versus going through the trial. And for many people, FBI included, this was a little bittersweet, as it was great to not have to go through the trial and the tax money, but at the same time, they never got to hear his testimony, so it's always this gray abyss of unknown. And on that note, I hope you enjoyed learning a very small condensed version of the Unabomber story. I hope you guys all had a fabulous weekend. I'm looking forward to next week to see what little Easter eggs and rabbit holes we go down. And yeah, so until the next time, keep being fabulous, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.